Welcome back everyone, it's Mags, and previously I covered all three versions of Hyperdimension Neptunia, a game about personified video game consoles engaged in an endless war with each other. Well, you can forget those console wars, something I wish people nowadays would do, because Hyperdimension Neptunia 2 takes us into a completely different timeline. It stars the same characters you all know and love, but the console wars and any lore that may have existed in Nep 1 is nowhere to be found. The setting is the same goddesses still rule game industry and preside over the same landmasses, and the game clearly expects you to already be familiar with all the characters that were in Nep 1, as it spends zero time introducing them or building up their personalities in any way. It's Neptunia, but not Neptunia. Neptunia 2 has two different versions. The original came out on PS3 in 2011 in Japan, 2012 in English, and is called Mark II. It's the second ever Neptunia game after HDN, the original Neptunia one. Then in 2014 in Japan, 2015 in English, Mark II was remade as Birth2 for the Vita and then later on PC. Birth 2 was made after all the original versions of Neptunia 1 through 3 and Rebirth 1, the remake of HDN. So today, I would like to look at both Mark II and Rebirth 2 to fully explore the second mainline entry of Hyperdimension Neptunia. We start with Mark II, and immediately it's clear that this entry basically established a lot of what the series is generally known for. So while I will be making some comparisons to HDN, as this was the follow-up to that game, I will also be making a lot of comparisons to Rebirth, as I covered that one as well as part of all the versions of the first mainline entry. Rebirth, from what I've read, was built on Victory, the third mainline game, but it's clear that Mark II started a lot of those conventions. For a game released only a year after its predecessor, Mark II is a far cry from what that game was. This is the first we see of the 2D world map that we see in Rebirth later. It also shows the landmasses as not separate floating islands, but as all part of one big continent, which is, in fact, what they are in this timeline. That makes the 2D map a lot more justified. It's the start of the dungeon exploration system, where each dungeon has one-time treasures you can find that look like these blue orbs, as well as the secret treasures you can find by violating the circle button in this case. The dungeons themselves no longer have a dark and dreary feel to them, but rather they're bright and vibrant. They even use some of these same exact dungeons and enemy designs in Rebirth 1. Encounters are no longer random, but intentional. They also use the same exact overworld map theme. Mark II is where Neptunia really found its footing in what kind of vibe it wants to go for. HDN felt like it didn't quite know if it wanted to be serious or silly sometimes. Mark II has a much clearer line, and it's a line that more or less stays firmly where it is. That is, 5% serious, 95% shits and giggles, with a healthy amount of fan service thrown in there for good measure. You won't find plot lines that delve into geopolitical conflicts here or subtle characterization. Mark II officially throws any semblance of subtlety out the window. You can see where Rebirth gets it from. Cutscenes provide us with 3D portraits in this entry. I personally like these better than the 2D ones. They're a lot more hit or miss, some characters do just look weird, why is she stanced like that? But I feel like it allows the characters to be more expressive in dialogue, and I've just never been much of a fan of the whole live 2D look anyway. Except they still do use 2D portraits in some of the chirper side events, which is such a jarring contrast. It feels like a jump scare every single time. And they're not even the animated 2D ones, they're completely stationary, except for blinking animations, just to really drive it home. I think they try to use these for the scenes that aren't as important, quote unquote, because a lot of them aren't voiced either. Like ones that are just meant to be completely standalone or that don't raise your Lily rank, although there are definitely 3D ones that also still fall into that category, so I don't know, I'm just trying to find a method to the madness here. But then half the time it feels like they only opt to use the 3D rather than the 2D because they just can't be bothered making 2D portraits for certain characters. Like, I swear to God, there are characters who never have a 2D portrait, even in chirper events that totally feel like they would have used them. So who the hell knows what's going on here, man? I've already mentioned that Mark II boots us into a new timeline, so what exactly is the deal with this version of game industry? Honestly, who knows? We don't get any kind of history lesson. All we do know is that the CPU goddesses are trapped in hell, and it's up to their little sisters to save them. Okay, yeah, this game throws a lot at you at once, so let's back up here. The goddesses are no longer the only CPUs in game industry, for there are also the CPU candidates. Essentially, CPUs that are next in line to be goddesses and fill a role akin to a goddess's younger sibling. These are actually who the secret optional recruitable characters were at the end of Rebirth 1. Except Leanbox, there's no candidate for Leanbox because Virt's too busy getting Cheeto dust on her controllers to take care of anyone. Instead, Louis has twin candidates because Blonde can't catch a goddamn break. I mean, the actual answer is that the candidates represent the handheld consoles of the time, as the quote-unquote lesser alternative to the home consoles. Nepgear, Game Gear, Uni, PSP, and ROM and RAM being the DS with its two screens. screens. I think that's the joke anyway. That makes 4, which fits perfectly with the joke that the Xbox did not have a handheld console. Each landmass also now has an oracle who serves as a wise assistant to the CPUs and helps take care of the candidates. Or at least they have to be filling that latter role now, because the CPU goddesses themselves have been banished to the graveyard. I'm completely serious. The game industry graveyard is a concept in Neptunia 2, and it's where monsters go when they die. At least that's the in-universe explanation, but it's really a joke about outdated game consoles and hardware. 3 years ago, an evil organization showed up in game industry and bested all 4 CPU goddesses, along with the Planeptune candidate Nepgear, and they've been held captive here ever since. Who is this evil organization? That would be ASIC. Okay, ASIC. They literally spell it out every single time, but I didn't play with English audio, and ASIC sounds natural and really cool, so I'm calling it that. ASIC is the R4 Syndicate of International Crime. Yes, you heard that correctly. R4. What do you mean she was defeated in the last game? That didn't happen, remember, silly goose? And besides, she's still not quite alive, so don't worry, you don't have to fight her 5 million more times. The organization's entire goal is to revive her, but to do that, they need power. And to get power, they need shares. To get shares, they've been getting the citizens to worship them more than the actual CPUs by promoting acts of filthy, heinous video game piracy. All this tells me is that the citizens of game industry know what's up, that's all I'm saying. The game opens up with IF and Compa on a rescue mission 3 years after the CPU's imprisonment and ASIC's rise to power. It's about 20% successful, as they only manage to rescue Planeptune CPU candidate Nepgear. From there, I shit you not, after a Star Wars style opening reel, the 3 of them travel across game industry to try and gather as much power and support as they can to take on ASIC again, with the main goal to acquire the power of each landmass's mascot character, because that's a thing, and that's all I can really say. Each landmass has some kind of mascot character, labeled as discs in dialogue, and they're powerful, I guess. They don't have much of their own characters and personalities, and aren't very prominent other than being convenient plot devices. Along the way, the party encounters various other humans, yes, maker characters, and the other CPU candidates, and frequently butt heads with ASIC. Actually, one ASIC member in particular about 90% of the time, because of course there has to be the recurring punching bag antagonist. This time around, it's Linda, or as she's better known derogatorily, Underling. And I mean like, much better known. They never say the word Linda again after she first introduces herself, and it's never said in Rebirth 2, period, to the point where people only familiar with the Rebirth games have no idea that's her real name if they didn't catch it in the 2 seconds it appears in the opening movie. Now that's commitment to the bit. The new cast additions are incredibly welcome. I'll admit it's weird not having the goddesses as main characters, especially Neptune, but now there's a new set of CPUs you can get to know throughout the course of the game, and I really love them all. They generally all share the traits of their respective goddess, but with their own twists. Nepgear is Planeptune's candidate and the main character this time around. As a mere candidate, especially one that's been in prison for the past 3 years after being bested, she is less than confident. But she takes after Neptune in that her kindness and optimism take her far. Although it's kind of impossible to be less responsible and disciplined than Neptune of all people, so she really feels like the big sister. Uni takes after Noir as last station's candidate and shares her pridefulness, with her main goal being to surpass Noir. Louise candidates are the twins Rom and Ram. What can I say about Rom and Ram? I love that they represent one side of Blonde's 2 extreme personality traits, Rom being her quiet and reserved side, and Ram being her loud and angry side. They are always together, but they express their love in polar opposite ways. Ram only knows how to be aggressive and drag Rom around everywhere to play, without any ounce of emotional intelligence with which to acknowledge her true feelings, and oftentimes goes too far with her possessiveness. Whereas Rom is more than happy to be dragged along, and is basically Ram's silent hype girl. They're all great characters and feel like unique takes on the goddesses that we were already familiar with. I also really love Underling. Yes, it gets even more obnoxious than R4 did with the amount of times you have to fight her, and that's really saying something. But I'll be damned if I say I don't like her design and don't still find her entertaining. And of course, you can't forget about her mousy companion, Pikachu. Pirachu. Excuse me. Maker characters also play a much larger role in this game than before. In HDN, the only maker characters who were major party members were, of course, IF and Compa. It's kind of weird to think of them as just maker characters, given that they've always had such a major role, but technically, yeah, they are. The few other maker characters in OG Nep 1 were never even involved in the main story, only showing up in side events or even only in DLC in the case of Red. I mean, sheesh, at least 5 5PB still had a radio show in the base game. Mark II tips the scales in the complete opposite direction. The other Maker characters are just as much a part of the main cast as IF, Compa, and the CPUs. I've always been a huge fan of the Makers. There's something so funny about the very concept of developer OCs. They feel like silly mascots in a way. Nisa, Gust, and 5PB all return as full cast members, and Mark II introduces the brand new ones Cave and Falcom too, although they're much less prominent and require a DLC for them to actually join your party, in addition to viewing a bunch of side events with them. That's a rather large cast, yeah? And that's not even all the party members, but I won't say much else about that right now. I'll save that for later. By the end, it definitely feels rather bloated, but when all the characters are this strong, I really can't complain. And it does kind of fit the narrative anyway of getting as much help as possible to take down the ultra strong ASIC members that already defeated the goddesses so long ago. My only real complaint is that the story had the opportunity to explore the whole setup of piracy versus legitimate means theme, and they just kind of don't? I mean, this is Neptunia we're talking about. Do I expect anything more than bad people bad, let's beat them up? Not really, but listen, it would have been nice to have some conversations and really analyze that aspect of gaming. Neptunia is all about parodying the game industry after all. The whole R4 revival thing completely takes over as the reason why ASIC is bad, and like, I get it, but can we talk about the piracy thing? I mean, even the main 4 strong elite soldiers of ASIC are all called CFW something, referencing obviously custom firmware. Like, that's pretty cool. Uni and one of them, CFW Brave, very suddenly have this deep discussion about it at one point, and it only made me wish there was so much more of that, given that's the thing most ASIC members actually care about, and the thing that was actively hurting game industry to take all their shares away. Even from the very first game, piracy's been referenced, because R4's name is a pun on R4, a very real device that existed that modded the DS. There's also just something almost creepy about the way the characters are exactly the same as in Nep 1, but they're not the same people. I mean, in Nep 1, you know how Neptune, IF, and Compa know each other because it happened in that game. Everyone's relationships and histories are contextualized so that the player understands who they are and what they're all about. Mark II just doesn't do any of that for the pre-existing characters, so it's just kind of weird that you basically don't know anything about them anymore. There's a hand-wavy chirper comment about IF and Compa being childhood friends, and a whole chirper side scene about how both of them met Neptune, which of course is just one big gag, and that's kind of it. So if the story isn't going to give us anything else, how about the gameplay? Mark II plays remarkably similar to Rebirth 1, and given that those games are supposed to be built on victory, it seems like Mark II spearheaded a lot of what would become staples. For one, there is a complete shift from the traditional turn-based affair Nep 1 had going on, to the field movement type of combat that's here to stay. Same deal as in Rebirth. Characters can run around within their movement range, and attacks and skills have AoEs to them, so positioning becomes important. The attacks you can use are similar too. Combos are 3 hits each after your first initial base attack, with triangle being rush attacks which specialize in multi-hit moves, square being power attacks which go for raw damage, and X being break attacks which focus on guard damage. Which, yes, guard and guard breaking basically work the exact same way as in Rebirth 1, except enemies stay guard broken until their gauge completely refills, which is nice. You can unlock new attacks by leveling up and choose which ones go where in the combo, except here at the genesis of this kind of combat system, you don't only get one combo, or even one general action per turn, because AP still exists, and literally everything costs AP. The same principle as in HDN applies here. Your turn never has to end as long as you still have AP left, with the sole exception being SP skills. As soon as you use one of those, your turn is over, but you can still do other things before that if you have the AP for it. This includes more unconventional things too, like using items. Items simply come with an AP cost, so you're able to use multiple different items in the same turn, or use an item, then attack, and then use an SP skill. So in a way, this is a mishmash of the original HDN's combat and the combat used in Victory and Rebirth. A perfect embodiment of the phrase stepping stone if I've ever seen one. This is technically the first time we see finishers as well. In Mark II, each character has some EX finishers they can perform as an extra attack at the end of a combo, but the EXE gauge doesn't exist yet, which is what those are based on in Rebirth. Here, an EX finisher is fired off if your combo follows a certain line of button presses. If you have enough AP left to go through the whole combo, a little EX will appear beside the next button when you're attacking to indicate that it will lead you to a finisher. Also, the finisher only works if that combo uses a certain amount of AP in total, so you have to be deliberate with how you you set up your attacks. It adds a little extra layer to the strategy because you have a combat system that's been revamped specifically to give the face buttons designated purposes. But then it goes, no, actually, don't use those. You'll get extra damage if you do this completely arbitrary combination instead. So then you have to decide if that's actually worth it, or you can just forego the finisher to do a different combo that you know is going to do more damage, or get you more SP, because that's important. Along with AP, I did mention there is also SP. The main thing SP does is give you the ability to use SP skills, which, yeah, no brainer, but SP works differently here than how you'd normally expect. You actually have to charge SP. The max anyone can have at any point is 300, and you automatically start with 0. You can carry over about 100 SP between battles, but normally it caps somewhere around there. You get 2 SP for every hit you land on an enemy, and some for every hit you take. This makes multi-hit moves like rush attacks extremely valuable, but even so, SP always felt like a huge drag in this game. It doesn't charge too fast unless you're late into the game where you have enough AP to use a ton of moves at once, which even then it's just a time sink to do that. The better moves that give you more hits just cost a ton more AP, so then you're back to square one with not being able to use many of them at a time. Here's the real kicker though. I said everything costs AP, and that is completely true, because even SP skills also cost AP. There's both an SP cost and an AP cost, so even if you do manage to scrape up enough SP to use what you want, you still have to make sure you have enough AP as well. So it's just an all-around awkward feeling system, but I don't even think that's the worst of it. The other purpose that SP serves is to use HDD mode. The CPUs can enter their CPU form from their default human form by spending, get ready for this, 100 SP. This is of course on top of the tight SP budget you already have for just normally using skills. So you know what, why don't we just go ahead and add another cost? What's the harm? While in HDD mode, they drain SP every turn. A CPU can only retain their CPU form as long as they have SP left. So even when you do manage to use it, it's not going to last. Maybe it's just so broken that it's still worth using even if just to fire off one special attack before it expires? Question mark? That's really the only way I see it working out, but it really just never felt worth it to me, so I kind of just forgot it existed the entire game. And anytime I tried to use it, it did not work out very well. Even so, I think the combat is pretty awesome in this game, even if just for the fact that it gives you so much freedom with your actions by way of AP. It's reminiscent of what I liked about the original HDN's combat, and just makes me wish they kept up with it. I could do without the SP shenanigans though. Another thing this game introduced is Lily ranks, although only Nepgear has Lily ranks in this one. Other than that, it's almost exactly the same as seen in Rebirth. You could assign a partner to each battling character that'll let you switch them out in combat, but a partner will also give the battling character some passive effects. Also, there are some special combination attacks that can only be used when specific characters are partnered together. When Nepgear is in the party, every other character on the field, whether they're battling or in the back as partners, will get their Lily rank with her raised, which means you can raise 7 at a time. It takes a lot of battles to raise Lily rank though, and I mean in the hundreds when you get to the higher ranks. But that's because that's not actually the main way it's supposed to be raised. Mark II has a very well appreciated side event system, where you can just view optional interactions with the party to help you get to know them more. This, of course, is done through my favorite genre of game mechanic, knock off Twitter. Everyone drop your favorite fictional version of Twitter in the comments. I raise you Tweepo from Robotics Notes. In Mark II, it's Chirper. Each landmass has a hub menu dedicated to its own citizens' chirper ramblings, and you can cycle through all their blurbs and get some hidden event scenes with the important characters. Many of these will significantly raise the Lily ranks of the characters involved, and some even give you rewards like craftable items or new skills to use. New ones are unlocked every chapter, so you can go to all the different landmasses and see which ones have opened up. It took me way too long to figure out exactly how this worked because the blurbs that show up seem so random at first, but no, you can just mash the dialogue of any given character, and if there's an event to be had, it'll come around pretty quick. All the NPCs and main characters in Chirper have these chibi sprites that I just absolutely adore. They look so goofy, it's hard not to have a big smile on my face looking at all of them. Mark II introduced items and thing. I mentioned that this game was the genesis of the dungeon exploration system that's carried into Rebirth, and that includes the entire materials item category. This is a special category of items dropped by specific enemies or found in dungeons that are solely used to craft things. Every unique enemy drops a unique material. In Rebirth, those things you crafted with them were plans. Plans could do all sorts of things, but one of those things was crafting specific items to add them to the shop for future buying. Mark II is what originally introduced that. You need to pick up the equivalent of an item plan, or what this game calls a product proposal, PP, although unlike plans, product proposals stay open as an alternative way to acquire those items as well. Crafting an item this way will give you one of that item, so if you don't want to pay for it, you can keep crafting them with materials instead through synthesis. one thing. Some might have an extra condition tied to them too, like needing Nepgear partnered with a specific character or needing her Lily rank with a character to a certain level. Side quests are handled the same way as in Rebirth, through the good old guild. New ones become available as you discover new dungeons throughout the story, you accept them and complete them at any point, and they'll have you killing certain enemies or acquiring certain materials for credits and item rewards. Mark II was also the start of the Colosseum, which becomes available towards the end of the game. And again, same thing we saw in Rebirth, a list of fights with their own recommended levels for credits and item rewards. Most side quests and all Colosseum fights are redoable. And just like in Rebirth, it also means that a major function of doing this is to manipulate shares. Mark II not only still has shares, a rather annoying mechanic to deal with in HDN and really all Neptunia games I've played so far, but it doubles down on them. Shares are more in-depth in Mark II than we have yet to see in any game we've talked about up to this point, and it's all the worse for it. You see, shares are still split into 5 categories, the 4 main landmasses and R4, except now each location, including the capitals of each landmass, and yes, I have to specify capitals, has their own distribution of all of these shares. There's not just one bucket anymore, each location on the map has its own bucket. So Last Station's capital, for example, can be, I don't know, 60% occupied by Neptune, and same for everywhere else. All categories of shares are present in each location, with their own 100% of shares to work with. So now you need an overall count of the total shares across all locations to compare to each other. This is what the game calls world shares. So to raise this, you need to raise shares in a bunch of different places individually to get the overall shares for that landmass up. And it's not just the 4 landmass capitals that have their own shares distributions, there are a bunch of random towns that open up on the map that only exist to have their own shares distributions. So when you see what effect a Colosseum fight or side quest will have on shares, it will tell you the specific location that change will happen in, which is what sponsored means. There is no reason for this, other than to just make you have to move shares more than normal, Lamau. I mean, the actual answer is probably world building. I do appreciate that there's some attempt to flesh out the landmasses themselves, but why did it have to be like this? Like usual, the main purpose of share manipulation is to get different endings. There are many different endings in Mark II, but 3 big ones: the normal ending, the true ending, and the bad ending. Except the game doesn't call it the bad ending, it calls it the conquest ending. This is probably because 1, it sounds rad as hell, but 2, I don't think there's a word that exists in the English language to describe how much of an understatement the word bad would have been. This is not a bad ending. This is a fuck you and your entire family ending. This is an ending that I am shocked they not only greenlit, but that they committed to with their whole ass chest. The entire last chapter changes, and the story derails into one of the most depressing things I have ever had to witness. I'll be honest, a part of me thought people were just playing up how screwed up it was because I had heard about it before. But you know, this is Neptunia we're talking about. It's just in comparison, right? No. This is just fucked up. And you know what? It's actually kind of cool? I'm obviously being vague for spoiler reasons, but I struggle to think of another example of anything like this. The fact that they went so hard in making an entire ending route that deals with making such difficult decisions and not shying away one bit in showing the effect that has on everyone involved is just so good. I don't know why they included it. It feels incredibly out of place, and it's no wonder it's one of the main things that's generally talked about when it comes to this game, but I respect it. Oh yeah, I was talking about shares and endings. To get the true ending, you need to have all 4 landmasses world shares to at least 15%. Yes, world shares. I've also seen it explicitly stated that R4's world shares need to be under 40%, but like, if that first requirement is met, then that second one will happen automatically, because that's kind of how math works. Also, Nepgear's Lily ranks with everyone need to be at least 4, one step down from the max of 5. Although if you want to get all the endings, which you need to do for trophies, you'll need everyone at rank 5 anyway, because when all the requirements are put together, that's basically what you need to do. But there is a third requirement to the true ending as well. You must recruit all of the optional characters. Yes, there are optional characters you can recruit, and there are trophies for recruiting them. It's kind of impossible to talk about a lot of the extra stuff in this game without saying it, and I've already alluded to it a bit anyway, so this is the closest to a story spoiler I'm going to be mentioning, given that it's a significant part of the game's content. This is your warning. So yes, starting in Chapter 5, you can recruit the CPU goddesses. Actually, Neptune joins automatically soon into Chapter 5, and the other 3 are optional. You have to get each landmass's capital shares to 50%, so Leanbox to 50% in Leanbox's capital, and so on. And then they'll join automatically, along with a bunch of Chirper events to view for them. They don't show up in Chirper until you have them in your party. You must recruit all goddesses and meet the other requirements before completing Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is the last chapter that leads to the normal ending, but if the requirements are met for the true ending, you'll be launched into some extra ones. For the dreaded Conquest ending, you need to meet the requirements for it before the end of Chapter 5. This is the only one with a time restriction. The other ending requirements can be met at any time on the normal route. The requirements for the Conquest ending are also to recruit all the goddesses, but then, before the end of Chapter 5, have Planeptune's world shares to at least 55%. Yes, world shares to 55%. That is a grind, because it means getting high Planeptune shares over and over again in different locations. And in addition to that, Planeptune's shares in Planeptune's capital specifically have to be at least 85%. You also need to view 3 special chirper events, which are gotten from NPCs. I believe these are the only chirper events that come from NPCs rather than main characters. There's one of these events in Last Station, Leanbox, and Louis. These open when Last Station shares in its capital are 35%, Leanbox shares in its capital are 45%, and Louis shares in its capital are 55%. Only when all of this is done, the Conquest ending chapter, called Apocalypse, will begin after Chapter 5 as opposed to the normal Chapter 6. The normal ending will happen if the requirements for neither the true ending nor Conquest ending have been met. In addition to those big 3, there are 5 other minor endings. In reality, these endings, quote-unquote, are just special post-credit scenes you can view after the normal ending, so you can't be in the Conquest or True route for these. There's one of these special scenes for each of the 4 landmasses, and also one for the Maker characters called the Human ending. For the landmasses, their respective post-credit scene plays if you end the game with its respective capital shares, not world shares, thank God, to at least 70%. And for each of them, each relevant CPU to that landmass's Lily rank needs to be maxed out with Nepgear. So for Last Station, for example, Last Station's shares in Last Station's capital need to be 70%, and Nepgear needs to have max Lily rank with Uni and Noir. For the Human ending, there are no shares requirements, except for not meeting the shares requirements of the other endings. All the humans' Lily rank simply needs to be maxed out. This means IF, Compa, 5PP, Nisa, and Gust. Every single ending, all 8 of them, is a separate trophy, but they're all pretty easily save scummable if you just reload near the end of the game and manipulate your shares a bit. In theory. I would love to be able to say that with 100% confidence, but alas, I cannot. Obviously, there's the issue with Lily ranks. If you start in New Game Plus, you can view all the Chirper events again and they'll continue to raise affection, which is nice. But that does also mean you have to do an entire New Game Plus. When you only have a couple more to raise, like I did at one point, battling might be more practical. I only had like 2 party members who were still at rank 4, which was annoying, but I ended up stocking up on a bunch of Forbidden Twigs, the item that respawns enemies, and just nuking an encounter I found that didn't have many enemies over and over. It still took well over 200 battles to raise the Lily rank from 4 to 5 this way, but being able to clear the battle instantly and spamming Forbidden Twigs to get them to respawn instantly, it didn't actually take as long as you'd think. Also, I think it does matter if your characters are in the front or back, because I had the 2 I was trying to raise in the back and the 2 DLC characters, Falcom and Cave, in the front, whose ranks were even lower, but they don't matter for the endings. During the process though, they got to rank 5 before my characters in the back, so keep that one in mind. So battling for Lily ranks is a viable option. However, shares can be even more of a snag, because not every combination of share manipulation is available in the game. For example, I moved a bunch of shares to Planeptune in Last Station's capital in an effort to get Planeptune's world shares up for the Conquest ending. Later, I discovered there is nothing in the game that moves shares out of Planeptune in Last Station's capital. Not one single Colosseum fight or side quest. I still needed to get the Last Station ending, so I needed those shares out. So New Game Plus time it is, because that resets all shares. It's insanity. The way New Game Plus works in Mark II, by the way, is the same as in the other games so far. Shares reset, all levels and equipment carry over, but everything has to be unlocked again, including getting late into the game's story before unlocking the Colosseum and having to recruit the goddesses all over again. The endings and recruiting the goddesses are the bulk of the trophies you have to work for in this game. A lot of the other ones you'll automatically get along the way, like reaching certain CGs you see anyway in the normal route or the true end route. There are 2 other ones worth noting though, one being to get all characters to level 99, excluding DLC characters, of course. For once, there's actually no DLC for raising the level cap in Mark II, so level 99 is the max level period. There are some free DLC dungeons that have pretty strong enemies that give you a lot of experience. These will appear at the very bottom of the map on the island shaped like a game controller. Oblivion Ruins is a good place to start grinding if you're level 60 or so, then later Hellfire Grotto, Way of the Samurai, and finally Trinity Step. The last trophy that's gonna be a bitch is one for defeating a very secret super boss in the game. At least the game tries to pass it off as secret, but in actuality, it's just a Colosseum battle that's only available in New Game Plus. It's a recommended level 95 fight called the Name's Delphinus, and will put you up against, take a wild guess, Delphinus. This boss is incredibly strong, and tanky as all hell, although there is a strategy to shred through it, which I guess goes to show how broken this game's combat really is if you know how to abuse it. Partner combination skills are particularly strong, especially Neptune and Nepgear's. You can get that one by viewing all of Neptune's chirper events. Since you can use multiple items in a turn, it's incredibly easy to partner those two together, preferably Neptune in the front, and spam the shit out of buffing items to raise her strength and avoidance so Delphinus misses more often, etc, whatever else you want. But also SP items so Neptune can spam her combination skill. Spread your characters out so Delphinus can only target one at a time. If all goes well, it'll only take a few turns to nuke Delphinus into the stratosphere this way, and you have your trophy. Honestly, I really enjoyed Mark 2. The cast shakeup was done really well, and it's hard to imagine Neptunia without the candidates and oracles at this point. Linda as a recurring antagonist was, while repetitive, still pretty funny. The character interactions were as top-notch as ever, and I mean it has Nisa, how can I not like it? Also, the Conquest ending is extremely notable, I cannot stop thinking about it. I love that AP was still a thing in combat, although not a big fan of how SP was handled. Overall, fantastic game. But of course, that is not the end of the road for Neptunia 2. For a few years later, they remade it as part of the Rebirth line as Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 2 Sisters Generation. This version of Neptunia 2 is much more similar to its original counterpart than Rebirth 1 was to its original counterpart, HDN. One of the biggest differences in Rebirth 2 compared to Mark 2 though, is in some of the characters. Since Nisa and Gust are no longer around for Idea Factory to use, and they were literally part of the main cast in Mark 2, they just straight up got replaced by different makers. Red replaces Nisa and Broccoli replaces Gust. The loss of Nisa is as tragic as ever, but honestly, having only gotten to see Red a little bit in the original Nep 1, it was really great to see her get to shine. Broccoli, I'm lukewarm on, I could take her or leave her. Also, they don't get side events at all. Nisa and Gust got their fair share of chirper events in Mark 2, and they definitely helped me appreciate Gust a little more, as I was also lukewarm on her just based on original Nep 1. But Rebirth 2 just doesn't bother giving these makers chirper events, so that kinda sucks. I would have loved to see more Red interactions, and maybe Broccoli could have grown on me. Also, Pirachu is now called Werachu, I think to be more accurate to the original script, so he has two names that he's known by now. That's awesome. The other main difference is of course in the entire presentation of the game. For one, cutscenes aren't in 3D anymore. They go back to the live 2D style seen in the other games, which for me is a little bit of a tragedy. Okay, it was cool getting to see 2D portraits of characters who never had one in the original, I'll give it that, but even if some of the characters in Mark 2 look goofy in 3D, I liked it a lot better. The biggest travesty though, the most unforgivable sin this game commits, is getting rid of Chirper. Okay, it's still there in name, but it's not the same. You don't get these cute hubs with all the chibi models with their blurbs. They just present everyone's blurbs and side events the same way the random NPC quotes appeared in Rebirth 1, where they just show up in the menus of their respective landmasses. Also, I think they still tried to fit all of the original random NPC chirper blurbs in here, because dear god, there are so many to read compared to Rebirth 1. Like, my heart would drop after every major story beat, looking at the map and seeing how much there is to read. The menus are more colorful, just like in Rebirth 1, in contrast to Mark 2's strange love of monotone colors, so I think that's a plus. Since it's a Rebirth game, it plays identically to Rebirth 1, which I've already talked in depth about. It uses a more simplified combo system without AP, SP works more traditionally with HDD being activated at any time, at the cost of 20% of your SP, adds EXE skills to the mix, Lily ranks are of course not just with Nepgear, but anyone with anyone, etc, which does mean it has plans. Obviously, Mark 2 did not. A ton of system-wide plans you can get are exactly the same as in Rebirth 1. One for increasing credits, increasing EXE gauge rate, weakening or strengthening enemies, and yes, even the one that makes you jump higher. Although I never actually ran into a situation in this one where that was actually required for anything. In fact, I never even ended up crafting it, and I got through all the optional dungeons just fine, which I'll talk more about later. I briefly mentioned when I talked about Rebirth 1 that each dungeon has plans that change the items you get at gathering points. Not the one-time treasures, I never really elaborated on that. And also one that changes the strong enemies found in the dungeon. Well, in Rebirth 2, those still exist, but there's a strange new one added to the mix. Change dungeon plans. These change everything at once, the enemies found in the dungeon and the items found from gathering points. But those are still different enemies and items than the normal change items and add enemies plans. And the change dungeon plans don't just change out the strong enemies, but every enemy type you can find in the dungeon. For example, you can only find Sergeant Frog enemies in Power Level Island when the change dungeon plan is on for Power Level level island. Rebirth 2 still uses the same material system where every single unique enemy drops a unique material, and you use those to craft plans. So the fact that the changed dungeon plans existing effectively doubles the amount of enemies in the game, and half of those enemies are locked behind craftable plans that each require materials of their own, the process of crafting plans in Rebirth 2 is a logistical nightmare. And that's not even to think of obtaining those dungeon plans themselves in the first place, which are mostly gotten from events on the map in certain story sections or found as treasures in specific dungeons. For example, get this, that credits up plan I mentioned earlier. To craft it, you simply need one material, one humble iron shell. Well, iron shells are dropped by an enemy on Power Level Island, but only with the Power Level Island Add Enemies plan on. Okay, to craft that plan, you need a crab shell, which can be dropped by an enemy in Panan Jungle. Panan Jungle is an optional dungeon, and so to craft the Add Dungeon plan just to get it, you need a strong thread. Luckily, that's just dropped by an enemy in World Labyrinth. That only appears with the World Labyrinth Changed Dungeon plan on. Okay, fine. To craft that plan, you need the Lost Holy Cloth, found from an enemy in Land Castle. You guessed it, with the Land Castle Changed Dungeon plan on. Guess what, fucker? You only get that plan in the first place from a story-related boss fight only done on the true ending route. Surprise! Route roadblock! But you finally get the plan. Crafting it requires a cool boxbird wing. Bam! You need the Septent Resort Change Dungeon plan for that one. That plan is gotten as a hidden treasure in Land Castle Underground. Okay, crafting it requires an ancient shell. Hey, guess where you can find one? Game Industry Graveyard, with the Add Enemies plan on. And on, and on, and on. Release me from my existential prison. Oh, but a new system-wide plan can be found called the Symbol Attack Gains plan. This synergizes with the other plan that already existed in Rebirth 1 and remains in Rebirth 2, called Destroy Symbols. Destroy Symbols make symbol attacks, which is when you get a preemptive strike on an enemy in the overworld, immediately destroy the enemy instead of having to battle it, if you're at a higher level than it. The catch is that you don't get any battle gains. No experience, no credits, nothing. As you may be able to guess, the new Symbol Attack Gains plan makes it so that you do get gains from insta-killed enemies, and it's everything, based on the same RNG that would determine the types and amounts of enemies that would be in the battle if you fought the enemy normally. You immediately get the appropriate amount of experience, credits, materials, and insta-kills even count towards Lily ranks. Needless to say, this plan is broken beyond belief, and I kind of love it. It's gotten as a drop from the God of Woe enemy in Game Industry Graveyard with the Add Enemies plan on, by the way. A lot of these system-wide plans are dropped by very specific strong enemies like this. Shares are of course back to how they were in Rebirth 1. Holy hell, good riddance, world shares. There are only 5 shares pools to worry about, as God intended. It doesn't mean they're not still a pain to move around, but they are less of a pain. Especially if you have the DLC that gives you 4 special shares quests just like Rebirth 1 had, that each give you a fake CPU goddess to go kill in exchange for moving 35% shares at a time. You'll need to be in the level 70s or so to beat them, but that's nothing that the right add enemies or change dungeon plans can't take care of. I grinded the Egg Plaladin, yes, that's what it's called, in the Lowy Expo dungeon west area with the change dungeon plan on, which gives you a good 100,000 plus experience a pop. Otherwise, you're stuck doing boring ass side quests over and over. There is the Colosseum, which you unlock in Chapter 5, but surprise surprise, it comes in the form of a plan you have to craft before you can actually use it. And don't even get me started on the materials you need to craft that one. Speaking of shares, they still serve the purpose of extra characters and endings, both of which there are more of in Rebirth 2 than there were in Mark 2. A lot of the ending requirements are exactly the same as in Mark 2, but you can replace either capital or world shares with just, shares. Also, even though Lily ranks max out at rank 10 in Rebirth 2 as opposed to just 5 in Mark 2, the rank requirements for those stay exactly the same, being to have Nep gear at just rank 4 or 5 Lily ranks with other members of the party. The one exception is the brand new ending they added to Rebirth 2, but we'll circle back around to endings in a bit. It'll make a little more sense to talk about the extra characters first. You can still recruit the goddesses by getting the landmasses to 50% shares in Chapter 5, and only in Chapter 5. But there are even more characters to unlock in Rebirth 2 than just them. Some of the makers that showed up in Rebirth 1's story are optional recruits. If you get lean boxes, last stations, and Louise shares to 30%, you'll automatically recruit Tekken, CyberConnect 2, and Marvelous respectively. Also, you can recruit Falcom and Cave in the base game. You don't need DLC like you did in Mark 2. They'll be available at different points in Chapter 3 as an event in the landmasses. Then in Chapter 6 at the earliest, you can recruit the oracles of each landmass. Yeah, you couldn't even play as them in Mark 2. They are totally optional, not required for any endings whatsoever. If you get each landmass to 50% shares, you'll unlock a plan you have to craft to unlock the oracle of that landmass. Crafting the plan requires the applicable landmass to be at 75% shares, so you actually need each one at 75%. There are achievements for recruiting each of the oracles. As for the endings, the normal ending is of course just gotten in Chapter 6 if none of the requirements for other endings have been fulfilled. The endings for each respective landmass are gotten from getting the normal ending with that landmass's shares at 70% or more, and having Nepgear's Lily ranks with the relevant CPUs of that landmass at 5 or higher. Just like Mark 2, but instead of landmass capital shares, it's just normal shares. As for the human ending, it also is the same as Mark 2 in that way, but the requirements for Nepgear's Lily ranks with the makers include the optional recruits of Falcom, Cave, Tekken, CyberConnect 2, and Marvelous. Of course, along with the main characters of Compa, IF, Red, Broccoli, and 5PB. That's 6 of the endings right there. For the true ending, you need to finish Chapter 6 after recruiting all the CPUs, having Nepgear's Lily ranks with everyone at 4 or higher, and having all the landmasses shares at 15% or higher. The requirements for the Conquest ending are probably the most different from what they were in Mark 2, but that's not saying much. They still need to be fulfilled before finishing Chapter 5, and they are to recruit all the CPUs, have Planeptune's shares at 55% or higher, and view all the Cursed Sword Chirper events. Much simpler than in Mark 2, as there's no obscene world shares requirement to deal with. Also, the Cursed Sword Chirper events don't require a shares threshold anymore. They simply open up in various points in the story, all in Chapter 2, so just keep a lookout for events that pop up in the landmasses. Hard to miss. That is 8 endings right there, and if this were Mark 2, that would be all of them. But Rebirth 2 adds a sinister 9th ending, the Holy Sword ending. The requirements for this ending are exactly the same as the Conquest ending. In fact, you will still be forced into the Conquest ending chapter after Chapter 5, the Apocalypse chapter. There are some extra requirements on top of all the Conquest ending requirements though. Those are to recruit all the makers, and have Nepgear's Lily ranks with all party members at 8 or higher. This includes the optional makers. It excludes DLC characters, obviously, and the oracles, since you can't even get the oracles until Chapter 6, and the Holy Sword ending requirements need to be fulfilled in Chapter 5. Once all that is met, you'll be put onto the Apocalypse chapter, and things will look like the Conquest ending for a while, but the story will take a turn during the event in Last Station. Without spoiling any specifics, obviously, this ending is incredibly weird to me. First off, the Conquest ending itself is just the same as it was in Mark 2, which is awesome. Still real ballsy, still real bone-chilling, still have mad respect for it. The Holy Sword ending, however, reads like they were embarrassed about the Conquest ending. It basically turns the Conquest ending into the true ending, by basically going, this is stupid actually, and then speedrunning all the character progression and dialogue that happens in the actual true ending chapters. Then it ends, and the ending after the final boss is also just the true ending. There's a different CG you see at the very end, but that's it. It's incredibly bizarre. Now, you may be thinking, gee, that was a lot of dry and bland info dumping about ending and character requirements. Why yes, you're correct. That is a big problem I have with Rebirth 2. Between all the different characters and endings, and the tediousness of crafting plans even compared to Rebirth 1, there is just too much to sift through. If you're not intentionally optimizing for efficiency, you can easily find yourself having to do New Game Plus after New Game Plus, and going through all sorts of plan crafting and share moving hell sessions just to see all the content and get the achievements that require all this stuff. It is very mind-numbing. I appreciate that all of it is here, don't get me wrong, but they did not make it easy on the psyche. But at least now we can take a break from all that. So, a funny thing, there's another studio that worked on Rebirth 2 called Stella. So of course they need a maker character, except the maker character Stella is not playable, not in Rebirth 2 at least. There is instead a side mode called Stella's Dungeon, a completely automated, real-time mode that runs in the background while you play the main game, and even while you don't. In this mode, you'll equip Stella with gear and send her off in dungeons. The dungeons available here are one-to-one with the actual dungeons in the main game, but in Stella's Dungeon, each one will have a certain amount of floors, and each floor takes a certain amount of real time to complete. You have to start at floor 1 every time you enter, and a dungeon is only marked as complete if you manage to clear all of its floors in one go. Different dungeons will have different strengths of enemies, so you don't want to be too ballsy and risk Stella being defeated. If she's defeated, you lose all of the equipment you put on her, and if that was the strongest equipment you had, you'll be worse off than when you started. If Stella does successfully complete the amount of floors you set for her, she comes back with her equipment and all the loot she found in the dungeon. You can see a log of Stella's activities in the last dungeon you sent her to, including which enemies she encountered, which gear she picked up, her stats at the time, etc. The enemies she finds mimics the actual enemies in the main game dungeon, including those that are found with add enemies and change dungeon plans, so you can strategize with which gear to put on her. Accessories will give her a lot of different effects, like if a strong enemy is weak to ice, you can put an accessory that makes her attacks ice-based. This is a whole lot of trial and error. You don't want to risk sending Stella too far, so you have to feel the water a bit. Spend the time sending her partway into a dungeon to get stronger equipment, or not if she still dies. Go a bit further, rinse repeat. For lots of dungeons that take lots of real time. There is one dungeon that's Stella exclusive called Neptunia Tower, which you will find a plan for in one of the early dungeons when you clear it with Stella. This dungeon starts with 10 floors, but it's unique in that it's not marked as complete when you clear all 10 floors. That's because you can find keys with Stella in other dungeons that unlock higher Neptunia Tower floors. First to 50 floors, then to 99. Once you clear the 99 floor Neptunia Tower, the true Neptunia Tower unlocks, which has 10,000 floors, although you explore 100 at a time as opposed to just one, so effectively it's only 100. But it still takes 8 minutes per, which amounts to over 13 hours for a full run, which you will not be able to do all in one go at first. You need to steadily keep pushing the envelope. It is required for achievements to clear every single dungeon in Stella's dungeon. If you don't have DLC, this may sound like a nightmare, and it probably still is. But don't worry, there is an exploit. A really big exploit. The reason Stella can keep traversing dungeons even when you're not playing the game is simply because it's based on your system's time. That's right, you can time travel Stella's dungeon. Literally just set the time on your PC for hours later and you'll instantly clear the dungeon. Or not if Stella dies. So even without DLC, even if you're losing your equipment, it does not take much time to get it back with some healthy time abuse. However, you can trivialize it even more. The reason I keep bringing up DLC is because yes, the devs did in fact create these problems to sell solutions. There's a DLC pack which adds 3 easy to craft plans to the game. 2 of them are regarding Stella's dungeon. There's Stella Express, which cuts the time it takes for Stella to traverse dungeons by a third, which doesn't actually matter if you're abusing your system time anyway. But the other is Stella Insurance, which makes it so that you don't lose your items when Stella dies. And in fact, you still get to pick up the new equipment Stella finds as well. So there's literally no reason not to just set her to the last floor of any dungeon, change your time, and whether she survives or not, you're gonna be better off. Now, is this unprecedented levels of cheese? Yes. Did I personally do it? You fucking bet. There aren't nearly as many extra dungeons in this game as there were in Rebirth 1. There's only 6. You get access to Power Level Island pretty early, but then there's a line of 5 other dungeons you unlock one after another meant for late game. The first of those is Panan Jungle. Then you find each subsequent dungeon as hidden treasures in the last. But of course, because this is Rebirth 2 and accessing dungeons requires crafting plans first, you will run into a snag. The second to last dungeon in this line, Subley Road, requires a material that's only found from an enemy that comes from the Add Enemies plan in one of the previous optional dungeons, Lost Ruins. Here's the kicker. The Add Enemies plans for all these optional dungeons, for some reason known only to God, are only available after a specific story event in Chapter 2 from an NPC blurb. And of course only for a short time. And remember, these dungeons are meant to be unlocked late game by virtue of how strong the enemies are and just straight up which materials you need to craft their plans in the first place. Which means you basically need to intentionally start a new game plus just to get to that point in the story to get the Add Enemies plans so you can get those materials to craft the later Add Dungeon plans. Luckily, all the plans for these optional dungeons typically only require materials that are found in those dungeons, so you won't have to progress late into the story again just for more materials. In fact, it's best to stay at that point in the story and keep unlocking the extra dungeons so you can immediately get all of the dungeon plans for them. This fucking game, I swear to God. These dungeons are the best non-DLC places to grind for levels, by the way, which is great for the getting all characters to level 99 achievement. I've talked a little bit about DLC, so let's expand on that. The DLC content of Rebirth 2 is mostly comprised of level cap raises, extra plans, and extra characters. Uzume, Baby IF, and Baby Kompa are all extra DLC characters. Some extra plans are gotten from the aforementioned Hiskey Survival Guide, the Stella's Dungeon plans, and then one other plan called Super XP Up. That's made to be instantly craftable and multiplies experience gained by 6. I didn't use that until I had everyone at 99, then turned it on for the rest. And then there are the additional content packs 1, 2, and 3. Just like in Rebirth 1, they raised the level cap by 300 each for a total of a 999 max level. They each also contain one change dungeon plan, meant to give you strong enemies to grind to those levels with. Additional content 1 gives you the change dungeon plan for Rebeat Resort, 2 gives you the one for Endless Zone, and 3 gives you the one for Iris Fields. Each one has enemies way stronger than the last, and will give you tons of experience and and credits. Once you're able to challenge the strong enemy and change dungeon Iris Fields called the Eggplant Knight, I just use that to grind to level 999 and 100 million credits, which you need for an achievement. I'm sure there are some good Coliseum fights for that too. I never really bothered much with it in this one if I'm being completely honest. The other significant DLC packs are for extra dungeons, the most notable of which is the Lily dungeon. It speeds up Lily rank grinding by 5 times, so it comes in clutch. Just slap a disc with a Lily rank up chip on Nepgear, and symbol attack gain the hell out of the enemies in this dungeon. That's what I did for the Holy Sword ending. Oh, and there's some DLC Coliseum fights as well. The achievements in Rebirth 2 actually aren't that bad. It really just stems from the sheer amount of content there is in Rebirth 2. And the achievements require basically all of it. There's an achievement pertaining to every single ending, and one for every oracle you can recruit. Defeating Delphinus is still an achievement, and that fight just comes from an Add Coliseum fight plan you can pick up from the map on a New Game Plus. Delphinus is recommended level 99, and given that the level cap raising DLC exists in this one, it's not even worth talking about aside from unlocking the fight in the first place. The only slightly grindy achievements are getting characters to level 99 and getting 100 million credits. Again, I point to the optional dungeons and the Eggplant Knight. I would include Stella's dungeon in that, but Oh, but there is one for crafting 200 plans. These are any plans, system-wide, dungeon, or items. But even after getting all the other achievements, unlocking all the dungeons and a ton of dungeon plans for them, I was nowhere close. Luckily, the outfit section of the item plans contains a bunch of outfits for many of the makers that all require the same, like 5 or 6 different materials. So I grinded the hell out of those, crafted literally every item in this section, and still didn't have the achievement. You just gotta find plans and grind them out. It kinda sucks. This is probably the most grindy achievement in the game, and that's really surprising. After the outfit section, I would point out the accessory section, because holy shit, there are so many of those, and you're bound to be able to craft something after getting some materials. I got the achievement eventually. Anyway, that is Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 2. Just a higher resolution, higher frame rate, rebirthified Mark II, complete with plans and some extra characters that weren't in the original. Although I'm incredibly tempted to say that I actually prefer Mark II, just for the AP-based combat system, and also, you know, Nisa, and how much of a pain plans are in Rebirth 2. But then again, Mark II has a world share, so pick your poison. But I truly don't think you can go wrong either way. They're both still really great games that are remarkably similar at their very cores. And that's about all I have to say. Another great entry in the Neptunia series. If you want to see more from me, especially more Neptunia, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good YouTube stuff. I've been Mags, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.